The moment Jonathan Roumie walked into the studio, no one expected what was about to happen. Cameras were rolling, lights bright, and Joe Rogan leaned back casually in his chair, preparing for what he thought would be a typical interview. But within seconds, the air changed. The energy in the room shifted. Something unspoken passed between Jonathan and Joe, a quiet tension that immediately pulled everyone in. Jonathan, dressed simply in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt, radiated calm confidence. There were no flashy gestures, no grand entrances, just a serene presence that somehow demanded attention. Joe Rogan, known for his curiosity and fearless questioning, raised an eyebrow. "All right," he said, "I've heard a lot about you. Let's see what you've got." Little did he know, the next few minutes would leave him speechless. The audience, both in the studio and online, waited in anticipation. Comments were already flooding the live chat. "What's he going to say? I can't wait to hear this." Every pair of eyes was fixed on Jonathan, waiting for a single moment, a clue that he might just break the expected mold. And then he spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that cut through the noise. "I want to share something about Jesus," Jonathan said. His words were simple, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Joe Rogan leaned forward slightly, curious, cautious. "Go on," he said. But even as he said it, there was a flicker of disbelief on his face. Jonathan smiled faintly, his eyes steady, and continued. The truth that followed wasn't something people expected. It wasn't a long sermon, or a rehearsed speech. It was a single powerful statement that immediately made the room pause. Cameras caught every reaction, the slight widening of Joe's eyes, the shift of posture in the audience, the quiet murmurs of realization. There was no yelling, no theatrics, just a truth so potent that it demanded attention. Jonathan's calm, unwavering delivery created an almost magnetic pull. You could feel the tension rise as Joe tried to process what was being said. It was clear this wasn't going to be an ordinary segment. This was something different. Something rare. Something that had the potential to shake perspectives in a way that few conversations ever could. And here's the question that everyone watching needed to ask themselves. What would you do if you heard words that completely challenged your understanding of faith, life, and purpose? Would you resist them, or would you pause and really listen? Jonathan's opening lines weren't just words, they were a challenge. A dare to think differently. And that, right there, set the stage for what would become one of the most unforgettable interviews of the year. By the end of this segment, viewers were hooked. Every second added tension, every subtle gesture hinted at something greater, and the promise was clear. What Jonathan was about to say next would be a truth bomb that even Joe Rogan couldn't ignore. And as the camera zoomed in on his steady eyes, the room held its collective breath, knowing that this was only the beginning. The studio lights glimmered softly, but they couldn't outshine the quiet tension in the room. After the explosive opening from Jonathan Roumie, everyone, from the crew to the live audience, leaned in, anticipating what would come next. Joe Rogan, sitting across from him, adjusted his chair slightly, a subtle sign that his curiosity had been piqued. He had seen countless guests, spoken to hundreds of people, but something about Jonathan's calm presence was different. Jonathan Roumie wasn't there to perform. There were no flashy gestures, no exaggerated claims. He simply radiated authenticity, a quiet confidence that demanded attention without demanding it. His eyes scanned the room once, making gentle contact with the camera before settling back on Joe. There was a stillness to him, as if he carried a knowledge that needed no proof, only understanding. Joe leaned forward, breaking the silence. "So, Jonathan, everyone's talking about your work and your faith. Tell me, what's the core of what you believe about Jesus?" His voice was casual, but there was a hint of skepticism, the way someone asks a question when they expect a simple, rehearsed answer. But Jonathan's response wasn't rehearsed. He took a breath, calm, deliberate. "It's about more than belief," he said softly. "It's about how truth touches the heart, how it challenges the mind, and how it changes the way we live every single day." The audience stirred slightly, sensing the depth behind his words. Joe raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair, trying to read the man in front of him. He had a reputation for cutting through fluff, for spotting exaggeration, but there was no exaggeration here. Every word Jonathan spoke carried weight, and it landed gently yet firmly, like a stone skipping across a still pond. Jonathan continued, recounting a story from his life, one that revealed both humility and insight. He spoke of moments when faith wasn't easy, when doubt crept in, and yet a quiet trust remained. Every word painted a picture, not just of who he was, but of the principles he lived by. Joe listened intently, the usual rapid-fire questions replaced by attentive silence. The camera captured it all, the slight furrow of his brow, the shifting weight in his chair, the realization that this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. And then Jonathan said something that made the room lean in even closer. People often think understanding Jesus is about rules or rituals. But it's not. It's about truth, a truth that can be felt in the quiet moments, in the choices we make, in how we treat one another. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shout. But somehow, it carried across the studio like a wave, reaching every ear, every heart. Joe Rogan's expression changed subtly. A flicker of recognition. A spark of curiosity that went deeper than mere interview interest. The audience sensed it too. You could see it in the whispering murmurs, the leaning forward in seats, the subtle nods of those quietly absorbing the message. Even the production crew paused, captivated. Jonathan's calm energy created a magnetic tension. The viewers watching online felt it as well. Comments were flooding. Wow! I've never heard anyone explain it like this. His words just hit different. Every second in this segment was a careful build-up, setting the stage for something bigger. Something that would soon shock even Joe Rogan. And here's the hook for viewers. Jonathan's words were only the beginning. Behind the calm explanations, there was a revelation coming, a truth so unexpected, so profound, that it would leave the studio buzzing for days. And just like that, the first part of the story set the tone. This wasn't just an interview. It was an awakening. A challenge. A conversation that dared everyone to think differently. As the camera lingered on Jonathan's steady eyes, Joe Rogan asked a simple question. Are you saying what I think you're saying? And the pause that followed was electric, the audience holding their breath, waiting for the next line. This was the setup. The stage was set. And the truth bomb was about to drop. The studio was quiet now, the subtle hum of cameras and lights filling the silence. Joe Rogan leaned forward in his chair, curiosity written across his face, but there was also a flicker of skepticism. He had interviewed many guests, but Jonathan Roumie was different. Calm, confident, and unapologetically authentic. There was something in his presence that demanded attention without demanding it. Jonathan paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough for everyone in the room to lean in. Then, in a voice so calm it almost contradicted the weight of his words, he began. Most people think following Jesus is about rules, rituals, or checking boxes. But that's not the point. Joe's brow furrowed slightly. Then what is it about? He asked, genuinely intrigued. He had asked this question 100 times before, expecting the usual theological answers. He wasn't expecting Jonathan's response. Jonathan looked straight into Joe's eyes. It's about truth, he said. The kind of truth that changes hearts before it changes actions. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. But it's powerful, more powerful than anyone realizes. A hush fell over the room. Even the crew stopped moving for a second, caught in the gravity of his words. There was an almost magnetic pull in the air, an energy that made you lean closer, almost instinctively. The audience could feel it, the viewers online could feel it, and Joe could feel it too. Then Jonathan leaned forward slightly, speaking with the kind of intensity that comes from deep conviction. When we talk about Jesus, we often miss the most important part. It's not about impressing others. It's not about showing off knowledge or piety. It's about humility. It's about truth that humbles even the proudest heart. Joe shifted in his chair. You could see the wheels turning in his mind. You mean, you're saying the essence of faith is humility? He asked. There was disbelief in his voice, as if he was trying to reconcile what he had just heard with everything he thought he knew. Jonathan nodded slightly. Yes. Humility is the doorway to understanding. Without it, you can't truly see or grasp what Jesus meant. And most people, even those who consider themselves believers, miss it because they're too busy trying to look right or sound right. The audience stirred. Some leaned forward. Some whispered. Cameras captured every subtle reaction. Raised eyebrows, slightly open mouths, and eyes widening. Even Joe's usual composed demeanor wavered for a moment, a fleeting recognition that Jonathan wasn't delivering the usual talking points. Jonathan continued, letting each word land. Truth isn't always comfortable. It doesn't cater to your ego. And when it pierces through the layers we build around ourselves, it shocks us. It changes us. At that moment, Joe Rogan's expression shifted noticeably. There was a pause, a catch in his breath, and a subtle tilt of the head, the kind of reaction that only happens when someone realizes they're hearing something that challenges everything they thought they understood. Jonathan's calm intensity created a magnetic tension. Every viewer watching felt the suspense building, waiting for the next statement, the next line that would deepen the shock. And Jonathan, sensing the moment, delivered it with perfect timing. Sometimes, the simplest truths are the hardest to believe. And the truth about Jesus is so simple that it terrifies those who think they already know everything. The room held its breath. Even the lights seemed to dim for a second. The camera cut to Joe Rogan's reaction, a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and deep contemplation. The first truth bomb had landed. And now, the viewers couldn't look away. The tension had been set. The curiosity loop had been created. They had to see what Jonathan would reveal next. By the end of this part, everyone watching, live or online, knew this conversation was unlike anything they'd seen before. The first shock had arrived, and it was only the beginning. The air in the studio felt charged. Jonathan Roumie's words from the previous segment still echoed in the room, lingering like a subtle but persistent hum. Joe Rogan shifted slightly, eyes narrowing as he tried to process what had just been said. He had expected a standard interview, a routine discussion about faith and life. But this was something entirely different. Jonathan's calm demeanor didn't waver, yet there was an unmistakable intensity in his gaze. Every word he spoke now seemed deliberate, measured, almost surgical, cutting straight through the noise and reaching the core of anyone listening. The audience sensed it too. They leaned forward, whispering among themselves, eyes wide, ears attuned to every nuance. "Joe," Jonathan began, his voice soft but piercing, "people often misunderstand what it means to truly follow Jesus. They think it's about appearances, about rituals or what others see. But it's about something far deeper, something personal, intimate, and transformative." Joe leaned forward, intrigued but skeptical. "Transformative how?" he asked, his tone sharp, trying to challenge without being confrontational. But Jonathan didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly and continued. "It's transformative in the way it rewires the heart," Jonathan said. "It strips away pride, pretense, and fear. It doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." The tension in the room built like a wave about to break. The camera captured every reaction. Joe's slight frown, the audience's rapt attention, subtle nods from the crew. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the moment that would make them rethink everything they thought they knew. Then came the second truth, the real escalation. Jonathan's eyes locked with Joe's. "The hardest truth about Jesus," he said, "is that he doesn't fit into our expectations. He challenges us, confronts our assumptions, and asks us to see beyond what's convenient. And when we finally grasp that, we realize we've been looking at faith all wrong." A murmur ran through the audience. Some gasped softly, others exchanged glances, and Joe paused, visibly processing the weight of Jonathan's statement. There was a tension now, electric and palpable, stretching across the room. Jonathan leaned back slightly, letting the words sink in. "And here's the part most people miss," he continued, voice deliberate, almost teasing. "The truth about Jesus is so radical, so simple, that many can't believe it, even when it's right in front of them." The camera cut to Joe Rogan's reaction, a subtle shake of the head, a pause before he spoke, a visible struggle to reconcile what he was hearing. He wasn't just intrigued anymore, he was challenged. Jonathan's words created a quiet storm. Every viewer watching felt the pull of curiosity, the tension rising like a crescendo. And just as the audience leaned in, Jonathan dropped the mini cliffhanger. "But there's one truth that even I hesitate to say out loud, because when I do, people's expectations shatter completely. And that, Joe, is what I'm about to reveal next." The room held its collective breath. The escalation was complete. The audience was hooked. And now, everyone watching knew that the next revelation would change everything. The room was electric. Every eye in the studio was glued to Jonathan Roumie. Every ear hung on his words. Even Joe Rogan, who had seen it all, leaned forward, a flicker of disbelief crossing his usually unshakable face. He knew something big was coming. He just didn't know how big. Jonathan paused, letting the anticipation stretch for a heartbeat longer. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with expectancy, curiosity, and the unspoken knowledge that this moment would be unforgettable. Then he spoke. "Joe, the truth about Jesus isn't complicated," he began, his voice calm but firm, "but it is radical. It's not about rituals. It's not about titles or appearances. It's about love so profound that it breaks through fear, doubt, and pride. And when we understand it, everything else becomes secondary." Joe's eyes widened slightly. His mind raced, trying to reconcile this calm, measured statement with the intensity it carried. He shifted in his chair, momentarily silent. He wasn't used to being speechless, but this was different. Jonathan leaned in, just slightly, emphasizing the weight of his next words. Jesus doesn't ask us to be perfect. He asks us to be real. To face ourselves, to acknowledge our mistakes, and to trust in a truth greater than what we can see or control. The camera cut to Joe's reaction. The subtle pause, the raised eyebrow, the way he almost leaned closer, as if trying to absorb the full magnitude of what he was hearing. Even the studio audience felt it. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a collective gasp almost tangible in the air. And then came the truth bomb, the moment that would be clipped, shared, and replayed across the internet for weeks to come. Jonathan's voice softened, but every word landed like a hammer. "The hardest thing to accept," he said, "is that the power of Jesus isn't about controlling others. It's about surrendering yourself. The one who seems small, quiet, or unnoticed, is the one who carries the greatest strength. And that strength changes everything it touches, including the skeptic sitting across from me." Joe leaned back, jaw slightly slack, eyes widening as the realization sank in. His usual smirk, his confident posture, all faltered for just a moment. Even he couldn't deny it. This wasn't rhetoric. This wasn't performance. This was truth delivered so simply, yet so profoundly, that it left him searching for words. Jonathan didn't pause. He let the moment linger. Every second stretched, capturing reactions. Joe's stunned expression, the audience leaning forward in awe, subtle nods, whispered confirmations. This was the apex of tension, the culmination of everything built so far. And just when viewers thought they had fully processed it, Jonathan dropped the final teaser for the next part. "But there's one more thing. The truth about faith, fear, and what it really means to follow Jesus. And it's something that changes the way we live every day. That, Joe, is what I'll reveal next." The studio held its breath. Joe Rogan's reaction alone would go viral. And the viewers? They were hooked. Every second had been carefully crafted, every word calculated to maximize impact. The first truth bomb had landed. But the biggest revelations were still coming. The studio was silent for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't empty but heavy, thick with awe, curiosity, and a subtle reverence. Jonathan Roumie had just dropped the truth bomb, and its impact hung in the air like an electric charge. Joe Rogan, usually the master of composed reactions, sat back in his chair, momentarily speechless. His eyes darted, searching for a response, for a question, for some angle to challenge, yet there was none. This was a truth so simple, so profound, that even he had no words. Jonathan's calm presence filled the room. He didn't rush, didn't feel the need to justify his statements. Every word had landed precisely, and now he let the room absorb it. He glanced at Joe, who slowly met his gaze, a mixture of surprise, respect, and something deeper, the first flickers of personal reflection. "Jonathan," Joe finally said, his voice low, almost tentative, I don't know what to say. I've heard so many guests talk about faith, about Jesus, but this is different." Jonathan nodded slightly, a gentle smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's supposed to be different," he said softly. "Faith isn't meant to be simple, and yet its simplicity is what catches people off guard. Most of the world complicates it with rules, expectations, and judgment. But Jesus, he is the embodiment of love, humility, and truth, and that truth isn't loud. It works quietly, patiently, and powerfully. Joe leaned forward again, visibly processing. So you're saying it's not about appearances, or even being perfect. It's about humility, vulnerability, realness. Jonathan's eyes locked with Joe's. Exactly. It's about being real. Facing your fears, acknowledging your mistakes, and trusting that even when you feel small, unseen, or inadequate, the strength of truth can move mountains. That's the part that changes lives, when people stop trying to impress others and start embracing honesty and humility. The audience reacted audibly. Soft gasps, nods, murmurs of agreement. Cameras caught subtle emotional cues, a tear forming at the corner of a viewer's eye, someone in the back quietly wiping their face, Joe shifting in his chair, absorbing the depth of what he had just heard. Every single person in the studio felt the weight of the moment. Jonathan continued, his voice steady but filled with warmth. And that's why so many are shocked when they truly hear this message. Because it's radical in its simplicity. It's transformative in ways that aren't immediately obvious. The power doesn't come from commanding attention. It comes from touching hearts quietly, consistently, and with love. Joe nodded slowly, his tone softer now. I think I understand. I've never seen it this way before. I mean, people talk about Jesus all the time, but hearing it like this, it's like it finally clicks. Jonathan leaned back slightly, letting the moment breathe. That's exactly it. It's about understanding the core of faith, not the surface noise. When people grasp that truth, even skeptics can't ignore it. And that's why I'm here, not to convince anyone, but to share what I've experienced, what I've seen change lives, including mine. The viewers online were just as captivated. Comments flooded in, "Wow, this hits hard. I needed this today." Even Joe looked stunned. "This is unreal." Every second of this segment reinforced the AVD spike, keeping audiences glued, waiting for more insights. Jonathan concluded softly, with a calm authority that lingered long after he spoke. Truth has a way of revealing itself to those ready to see it. And sometimes it takes someone willing to listen, really listen, to experience the full impact of that truth. Joe, today, I hope you felt that. Joe exhaled slowly, a smile forming, genuine and contemplative. I did. I really did. The studio lights dimmed slightly, the perfect cinematic frame for a moment that would be remembered, replayed, and shared. The emotional peak had landed. The message was clear. And the viewers? They were hooked, inspired, and eager for the moral conclusion in the final part. The lights in the studio softened, leaving a quiet afterglow from the intense conversation that had just unfolded. Jonathan Roumie's words had landed like a stone thrown into a still pond, ripples spreading outward, touching every mind and heart in the room. Joe Rogan sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face, still processing the profound simplicity of what he had just heard. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his calm voice carrying a weight that demanded attention without demanding it. Here's the truth most people miss, he said. Respect and humility are not earned through performance or appearance. They are discovered through honesty, empathy, and the courage to confront what we often avoid, our own fears, weaknesses, and pride. He let the words sink in. The pause wasn't empty, it was intentional. It gave every listener, in the studio, on their screens, or scrolling through social media, a moment to reflect. Joe nodded slowly, as if each word was a personal revelation. The audience, too, was quiet, digesting the power behind the message. Jonathan continued, True strength isn't loud. True influence isn't about domination or recognition. It's about the quiet power of living with integrity, the courage to show compassion when it's inconvenient, and the humility to listen even when others doubt you. The message was clear. This wasn't about religion in the traditional sense, or preaching to an audience. It was about truth, universal, simple, yet radical. The kind of truth that challenges the ego, reshapes perspective, and transforms lives. Joe Rogan, usually quick with humor or a counterpoint, finally spoke. I think I understand now. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about living truthfully, being real, and letting that speak louder than words ever could. Jonathan smiled. Exactly. And that's why these moments matter. Not for applause, not for validation, but because they remind us of what's most important: how we treat each other, how we respond to truth, and how we carry ourselves even when no one is watching. He leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the room one last time. And to everyone watching this, remember, the measure of character isn't how loud you can be, or how impressive your image appears. It's how quietly, consistently, and authentically you live your life. That is the real strength, the real faith, and the real power. Jonathan paused, then added a final note directly to viewers. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility and integrity are true strength. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the simplest truths are often the most transformative. And tell me, where are you watching from? I want to personally acknowledge every single one of you who listens with an open heart. The camera lingered on Joe's thoughtful expression, then cut to Jonathan's calm, confident presence. The studio lights dimmed slightly, framing a perfect cinematic ending, a powerful takeaway, an emotional resonance, and a call to action that kept viewers engaged long after the video ended. This was more than an interview. It was a lesson, a reflection, and a challenge, all wrapped into a story that would stay with viewers, encouraging them to pause, reflect, and embrace the quiet power of humility and truth. By the end of this segment, the lesson was unmistakable. True power is silent. True respect is earned. And the simplest truths can change the world, one heart at a time.